Manchester Zoo on a Sunday afternoon in late September was exactly what families across Greater Manchester needed after a long week, a chance to escape the routine of daily life and marvel at the natural world. The autumn sun filtered through the changing leaves of the oak trees that bordered the zoo's pathways, casting dappled shadows across the walkways where hundreds of visitors moved in the easy rhythm of weekend leisure. The Whitlock family had been looking forward to this outing for weeks. Crispin Whitlock, a 38-year-old accountant with a perpetually worried expression that came from managing other people's money, walked alongside his wife Juniper, 35, and radiating the kind of patient energy that comes from years of managing both a household and a particularly energetic 6-year-old son. Their boy Bramble was exactly the sort of child who made zoo visits simultaneously wonderful and terrifying for parents, curious about everything, fearless in his exploration, and possessed of the kind of boundless energy that could turn a peaceful family outing into an adventure at any moment. "Stay close to Daddy, Bramble," Juniper called as their son darted ahead toward the lion enclosure, his small frame moving with the quick, unpredictable movements of childhood excitement. The lion habitat was one of the zoo's newest attractions, featuring a naturalistic environment separated from visitors by a deep moat and high glass barriers designed to provide both safety and optimal viewing angles. Crispin quickened his pace to keep up with his son, but his attention was momentarily diverted by his phone, buzzing with what seemed to be an urgent work email. It was the kind of split-second parental distraction that happens to even the most careful families, a momentary lapse in vigilance that under normal circumstances would result in nothing more serious than a child wandering a few steps too far ahead. But these weren't normal circumstances. Bramble, in his excitement to get a better view of the magnificent male lion lounging in the afternoon sun, had spotted what appeared to be a gap in the barrier near a maintenance access point that had been inadvertently left partially open during routine cleaning. With the lightning-quick decision-making of a 6-year-old who sees an opportunity for adventure, he squeezed through the opening before anyone could react. The 8-foot drop into the moat was swift and silent. One moment, Bramble was standing safely on the visitor side of the barrier, and the next he was lying stunned at the bottom of the enclosure, his small body crumpled against the rocky substrate that separated the public from one of nature's most formidable predators. Juniper's scream cut through the ambient noise of the zoo like a blade. "Bramble!" The raw terror in her voice caused every visitor within 100 meters to stop what they were doing and look toward the lion enclosure. The scene that greeted them was every parent's worst nightmare made manifest. A small child, clearly dazed and struggling to sit up, was alone in an enclosure with a full-grown African lion. The massive male, startled by the sudden intrusion into his territory, rose to his feet with the fluid grace of an apex predator, his golden eyes fixed on this unexpected and vulnerable visitor. Thaddeus Grimwood, the zoo's headkeeper, and a man who had worked with dangerous animals for over 20 years, was conducting a routine check of the primate enclosures when he heard Juniper's scream. His experience and training kicked in immediately as he began running toward the lion habitat, his radio already in hand to call for the emergency response team. But even as he ran, Thaddeus knew with sickening certainty that he was too far away, that the protocols and procedures designed to handle exactly this type of emergency would take precious minutes to implement, and that a 6-year-old child didn't have minutes. The crowd of visitors that had gathered around the enclosure stood frozen in a collective paralysis of horror and helplessness. Phones appeared in dozens of hands, some calling for help, others automatically beginning to record what they feared might be a tragedy. Persephone Blackthorne, a 29-year-old social media influencer who had been documenting her zoo visit for her followers, found herself filming without conscious decision, her hands shaking as she tried to process what she was witnessing. Calum Ashworth, the zoo's head of security, was running toward the scene from the opposite direction, his hand already reaching for the tranquilizer gun that was part of the emergency protocols. But like Thaddeus, he knew that even in the best-case scenario, it would take several minutes to reach the enclosure, assess the situation, and implement a safe rescue. It was in this moment of collective helplessness that Tyson Fury made a decision that would be replayed on social media millions of times in the coming weeks. The retired heavyweight champion had been visiting the zoo quietly with his own family, hoping for a peaceful afternoon away from the public attention that usually followed him. When Juniper's scream pierced the air, his first instinct was the same as every other parent present, to look toward the sound of distress. What he saw caused him to act without thought, without consideration of consequences. without any of the careful calculation that might have held back someone less accustomed to making split-second decisions under pressure. A child was in mortal danger, and he was close enough to do something about it. Tyson vaulted over the barrier with surprising agility for a man of his size, dropping the 8 feet into the enclosure and landing in a crouch between Bramble and the lion. His massive frame, imposing even by human standards, suddenly seemed almost fragile in comparison to the raw power of the wild animal now focused entirely on this new intruder. The lion, confused by the appearance of this second unexpected visitor, paused in his approach toward Bramble. Tyson slowly stood to his full height, spreading his arms wide to make himself appear even larger, and began speaking in a low, steady voice that carried both authority and calm. "Easy there, big fellow," he murmured, never taking his eyes off the lion. "I know we're not supposed to be here, but we're just going to leave quietly now." The next few minutes stretched like hours as Thaddeus and his team finally reached the enclosure and implemented the emergency protocols that allowed them to safely extract both Bramble and Tyson from the habitat. The lion, more confused than aggressive, eventually retreated to the far end of the enclosure as the rescue proceeded. When Bramble was finally lifted to safety and placed in his parents' arms, the crowd erupted in spontaneous applause. Tyson emerged from the enclosure to find himself surrounded by people wanting to shake his hand, take photos, and express their admiration for his courage. But something was wrong. Bramble, physically unharmed aside from some scrapes and bruises from his fall, wasn't responding to his parents' attempts to comfort him. The little boy who had been chattering excitedly about lions and tigers just minutes before was now completely silent, staring straight ahead with empty eyes that seemed to focus on nothing. Lyra Pemberton, the zoo's chief veterinarian, and a woman trained in both animal and emergency human medicine, knelt beside the child and conducted a quick assessment. Her expression grew increasingly concerned as she observed Bramble's lack of response to external stimuli. "He appears to be in shock," she said quietly to Crispin and Juniper, her professional calm barely masking her own worry. "Sometimes when children experience severe trauma, they can develop what we call dissociative symptoms. He's not responding to his name, not making eye contact, not speaking." Juniper's relief at having her son safely back in her arms began to transform into a different kind of terror. "But he's okay, right? He'll be fine once we get home?" Lyra hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Children who experience this level of trauma can sometimes develop longer-term psychological effects, selective mutism, anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress. "We need to get him to the hospital immediately for proper evaluation." The words hit Crispin like physical blows. His son, who had been perfectly normal and happy just minutes earlier, was now a stranger, present in body but absent in every way that mattered. "You're saying this could be permanent?" "I'm saying we need to get him professional help as quickly as possible. The sooner we can intervene, the better his chances of a full recovery." Tyson, who had been standing nearby accepting congratulations from other visitors, overheard this conversation and felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had acted instinctively to save a child from physical harm, but what if his intervention had somehow caused a different kind of damage? What if, in his urgency to protect Bramble from the lion, he had inadvertently exposed the boy to a trauma that would prove even more lasting than any physical injury could have been? As the ambulance arrived and Bramble was carefully loaded onto a stretcher, still silent and unresponsive, Tyson found himself questioning everything about the previous few minutes. Had he done the right thing? Would Bramble have been better off if he had waited for the professionals to handle the situation? Was the boy's current state somehow his fault? The crowd that had been celebrating his heroism just moments before began to disperse. Many of them now focused on their own children, holding them a little closer as they processed what they had witnessed. The joy and excitement of a family day at the zoo had been replaced by something much darker. The understanding that safety was more fragile than anyone wanted to believe, and that even acts of courage could have consequences that no one could predict. As Tyson watched the ambulance drive away with the Whitlock family inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that this story was far from over, and that the most difficult challenges were yet to come. Manchester Royal Infirmary's Pediatric Emergency Department had seen its share of traumatic cases, but the arrival of 6-year-old Bramble Whitlock brought with it an unusual level of media attention that made the staff's already difficult job even more challenging. News of Tyson Fury's dramatic rescue at the zoo had spread across social media with the speed that only truly sensational stories could achieve, and by the time the ambulance reached the hospital, reporters and photographers were already gathering outside. Inside the hospital, however, the focus was entirely on Bramble's condition, which had not improved during the 20-minute journey from the zoo. If anything, his dissociative state seemed to be deepening. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the pediatric psychiatrist called in to evaluate him, found herself dealing with a child who appeared to be physically present but psychologically unreachable. "Bramble," she said softly, kneeling beside his hospital bed, "can you tell me your name?" The boy's eyes moved slightly in her direction, but there was no recognition, no acknowledgement that he had even heard the question. His small hands lay motionless on the white hospital blanket, and his breathing was so shallow that Juniper found herself leaning forward periodically to make sure he was still alive. "Is this normal?" Crispin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The confident accountant who could handle complex financial crises with ease was completely lost when faced with his son's inexplicable condition. Dr. Mitchell chose her words carefully. Post-traumatic dissociation in children can manifest in various ways. Some children become hypervigilant, others withdraw completely. Bramble appears to be experiencing what we call emotional numbing, his mind's way of protecting him from processing the full impact of what happened. But he'll get better, right? Juniper's question carried the desperation of a mother confronting her worst fears. "This is temporary? Every child responds differently to trauma therapy," Dr. Mitchell replied. "With proper treatment, many children make full recoveries, but I won't lie to you, some cases of childhood trauma can result in long-term psychological effects. Selective mutism, anxiety disorders, difficulty forming attachments. The possibility that her bright, talkative, endlessly curious son might never be the same again sent Juniper into a spiral of grief that felt like drowning. She had spent 6 years nurturing his personality, encouraging his questions, delighting in his discoveries, and now all of that might be gone because of a few terrible minutes at the zoo. It was then that the first complication arose, one that would transform Tyson's heroic rescue into something much more controversial. A male nurse approached Bramble's bed to check his vital signs, and the boy's reaction was immediate and alarming. His eyes widened with terror, his body went rigid, and he began hyperventilating so severely that Dr. Mitchell had to call for additional staff to help calm him down. "What's happening?" Crispin demanded, as medical personnel surrounded his son's bed. "He's having a panic response," Dr. Mitchell explained, as she helped administer a mild sedative to calm Bramble's breathing. "It appears to be triggered by the presence of adult males." The implications of this hit Crispin like a physical blow. "You mean he's afraid of men? All men?" Over the next several hours, this pattern repeated itself every time a male doctor, nurse, or technician attempted to approach Bramble. The boy, who had always been friendly and outgoing with everyone, now seemed to view half the human population as a threat. "I can't even get close to my own son," Crispin said to Juniper as they watched their boy from across the room. "He looks at me like I'm going to hurt him." The psychological evaluation revealed the extent of the challenge they were facing. Bramble's traumatic experience had somehow become associated in his mind with male figures, possibly because the most prominent figure in his memory of the incident was Tyson Fury, the large, imposing man who had appeared suddenly in the enclosure. While Tyson's intentions had been entirely protective, Bramble's traumatized psyche had apparently processed his presence as part of the threat rather than the solution. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, the narrative surrounding Tyson's rescue was beginning to shift in ways that no one could have predicted. Persephone Blackthorne, whose video of the incident had already been viewed over 2 million times, had posted a follow-up video that included her commentary on the situation. "So I've been thinking about what happened at the zoo today," she said into her phone camera. "And I have to ask, was this guy really being heroic, or was he just trying to get attention? I mean, there were professionals who could have handled this safely. But instead, this random man decides to jump into a dangerous situation, and now look what's happened to that poor child." The comments on her video reflected a growing sentiment that Tyson's actions, while well-intentioned, had been reckless and potentially harmful. "He traumatized that kid worse than the lion would have," wrote one commenter. "Now the boy can't even function normally," added another. By evening, the story had been picked up by major news outlets, but the angle had shifted dramatically from the morning's "Local Hero Saves Child" headlines to more critical coverage questioning whether Tyson's intervention had actually made the situation worse. Calum Ashworth, the zoo's head of security, found himself fielding calls from reporters eager for someone to criticize Tyson's actions. "Mr. Fury violated every safety protocol we have in place," he told BBC Manchester. "Our emergency response teams are trained specifically for these situations, and his interference could have resulted in tragedy, not just for the child, but for himself and potentially other visitors." The criticism intensified when footage emerged showing Tyson speaking with reporters outside the hospital, accepting praise for his actions while Bramble lay traumatized in a hospital bed upstairs. The optics were devastating, creating an image of a man more interested in basking in admiration than considering the consequences of his actions. "Massive ego trip," read one social media comment. He saw cameras and couldn't resist playing the hero. Tyson, who had never sought publicity for the rescue and had been genuinely trying to help when reporters approached him, found himself blindsided by the sudden shift in public opinion. His phone was flooded with messages from his management team, friends and family, all asking him to respond to the mounting criticism. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source. Juniper Whitlock, overcome with exhaustion, grief and anger at seeing her son in such a condition, gave an emotional interview to a local news station that would be replayed endlessly over the following days. "My son was in danger, yes," she said through tears, "but he was 8 feet away from that lion and the animal wasn't even approaching him aggressively. The zoo has protocols for exactly these situations, but this man decided he knew better than the professionals, and now my boy can't even look at his own father without having a panic attack." Her words, delivered with the raw emotion of a mother in crisis, carried more weight than any expert analysis could have. Here was not the family of someone grateful for rescue, but the family of a victim not just of the zoo accident, but of Tyson's intervention itself. The media narrative crystallized around this perspective. Tyson Fury, seeking attention and glory, had recklessly inserted himself into a dangerous situation, potentially making it worse and definitely traumatizing a child who might have been safely rescued by professionals if given the chance. When Tyson finally left the hospital that evening, he was met by a crowd of reporters shouting questions that felt more like accusations. "Do you take responsibility for Bramble's condition? Do you regret your actions? What do you say to critics who call this a publicity stunt?" Exhausted and emotionally drained, Tyson made the mistake of trying to defend himself. "I saw a child in danger, and I acted," he told the cameras. "I'd do the same thing again, in the same situation." Those words, meant to express his genuine commitment to protecting children, were seized upon by critics as evidence of his arrogance and lack of remorse. Social media exploded with condemnation. "He doesn't even care that he traumatized a kid, still thinks he's the hero." Sociopathic lack of empathy. As Tyson drove home through the Manchester streets, where he had been a beloved figure just that morning, he realized that everything had changed. He was no longer the hero who had saved a child. He was the reckless celebrity who had made everything worse. The weight of that transformation and the knowledge that a 6-year-old boy was lying in a hospital bed, afraid of half the world because of his actions, settled over him like a suffocating blanket. For the first time since the incident, Tyson Fury began to wonder if everyone else was right, and if his moment of instinctive heroism had actually been the most selfish thing he had ever done. 3 days after the zoo incident, Tyson Fury sat in his Manchester home, staring at a television screen that seemed determined to remind him of his transformation from hero to villain. Every news channel carried some version of the same story. Zoo rescue gone wrong, when good intentions cause harm, the Bramble Whitlock tragedy. His phone had been ringing constantly with interview requests, most of them clearly hoping he would say something that would make the story even more sensational. His management team had advised him to stay silent, to let the storm pass, to wait for some other story to capture the public's attention. But Tyson couldn't stop thinking about Bramble's empty eyes, the way the boy had looked right through everyone in that hospital room, as if the world itself had become a place too dangerous to fully inhabit. Against every piece of advice he had received, against his family's wishes, against his own better judgment, Tyson made a decision that would either redeem him or destroy what remained of his reputation. He was going back to the hospital. Manchester Royal Infirmary at 2 a.m. was a different world from the media circus that had surrounded it during visiting hours. The corridors were dimly lit and mostly empty, staffed by skeleton crews of night shift workers who were too busy with their responsibilities to pay much attention to a tall figure in a baseball cap making his way through the pediatric wing. Tyson had spent hours studying the hospital's layout online, memorizing the locations of security cameras and shift change schedules. He knew he had perhaps 30 minutes before his presence would be discovered, and he intended to make the most of them. Bramble's room was in the secure pediatric psychiatric ward, behind doors that required keycard access. But Tyson had learned long ago that confidence and a friendly smile could get you through most barriers, and the night nurse who saw him approaching assumed he was a visiting family member who had gotten lost. "Visiting hours ended 6 hours ago," she said gently, clearly recognizing him but trying to be professional about it. "I know," Tyson replied. "I'm not here as a visitor. I'm here because I need to make something right." Something in his voice, the exhaustion and genuine remorse that he couldn't hide, made the nurse pause. She had been working pediatric wards for 15 years, and she had seen enough tragedy to recognize the difference between celebrity entitlement and genuine human anguish. "5 minutes," she said quietly, unlocking the door. "If anyone asks, I never saw you." Bramble's room was dark except for the soft glow of monitoring equipment. The boy lay in the center of a hospital bed that seemed enormous compared to his small frame, his breathing steady but shallow. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling with the same empty expression that had haunted Tyson for days. Tyson entered the room slowly, making no sudden movements that might startle the child. Instead of approaching the bed, he sat down on the floor near the door, making himself as small and non-threatening as possible. "Hello, Bramble," he said softly. "I know you probably don't want to see me, and I understand why. I'm the scary man from the zoo, aren't I?" Bramble's eyes moved slightly in Tyson's direction, the first sign of awareness he had shown in days. "I came here because I need to tell you something important," Tyson continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you that I'm sorry. Not sorry for trying to help you, but sorry that trying to help you made you feel scared." The boy's head turned slightly, and for the first time since the incident, his eyes seemed to focus on something specific, the large man sitting humbly on the floor of his hospital room. "You know what?" Tyson said, settling more comfortably against the wall. "I'm scared too. I know I look big and strong, and people think big, strong people aren't supposed to be scared of anything, but that's not true. I'm scared of lots of things." Bramble's breathing seemed to slow slightly, becoming less labored. "I'm scared of small spaces," Tyson continued. "I'm scared of disappointing people I care about. I'm scared of making mistakes that hurt other people, even when I'm trying to help them." For several minutes, Tyson simply sat in comfortable silence, allowing Bramble to process his presence without pressure or expectation. When he spoke again, his voice carried a quality of storytelling that seemed to draw the boy deeper into the moment. "Do you want to know a secret about that lion at the zoo?" Tyson asked. "When I jumped into his house, do you know what he said to me?" For the first time since the incident, Bramble showed a flicker of curiosity. His eyes focused more intently on Tyson's face. He said, "Who is that incredibly brave boy up there?" And I said, "That's Bramble, and he's probably the bravest person I've ever met." And the lion said, "Well, that explains it. Only really brave people can make lions nervous just by being themselves." Bramble's lips moved slightly, the ghost of what might have been a smile. "The lion told me that he was actually relieved when I showed up," Tyson continued, "because he was getting worried about how brave you were. He said most people who fall into lion enclosures are screaming and running around, but you just sat there looking at him, like you were trying to figure out if he needed a friend. That's—" The word came out as barely a whisper, so quiet that Tyson almost missed it. "What's that, mate?" Tyson asked gently. "That's not true," Bramble said, his voice stronger now. "Lions can't talk." Tyson smiled, the first genuine smile he had felt in days. "You're absolutely right. Lions can't talk. But if they could, I think that's what he would have said about you." Bramble sat up slightly in his bed, still cautious but clearly more engaged. "Why did you jump in there?" "Because," Tyson said, "when you see someone who might be in trouble, you try to help them, even if you're scared, even if you might make mistakes, even if other people think you should have done it differently." "Were you scared of the lion?" "Terrified," Tyson admitted. "But I was more scared of something happening to you." Bramble was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When he spoke again, his question caught Tyson completely off guard. "Are you scared of me?" The question revealed everything about how the boy had been processing his experience. In his traumatized mind, he had somehow become the source of danger, the person whose presence caused terrible things to happen. "Oh, Bramble," Tyson said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not scared of you at all. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met. You survived something that would frighten most adults, and you're still here, still thinking, still caring about other people." "I made everyone upset," Bramble said, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "No, sweetheart, you didn't make anyone upset. Sometimes scary things happen, and it's not anyone's fault. The only people who should be upset are the ones who forgot to check that the gate was properly locked. It was then that Juniper appeared in the doorway, having been alerted by the night nurse that someone was with her son. She had expected to find an intruder, possibly a reporter who had somehow gained access to the ward. Instead, she found the man who had become the focus of her anger and grief sitting humbly on the floor, speaking gently to her son, who was more responsive than he had been since the incident. "Mummy!" Bramble called out, his voice carrying more life than it had in days. "The scary man isn't scary, he's just big." Juniper stood frozen in the doorway, watching her son, who had been unreachable for 3 days, suddenly animated and communicative. The anger she had been carrying toward Tyson began to crack as she witnessed the gentleness with which he was treating Bramble. "He told me the lion thought I was brave," Bramble continued excitedly, "and he said, even big people get scared sometimes." Tyson stood slowly, his hands visible and non-threatening. "Mrs. Whitlock, I know I'm not supposed to be here. I know you're angry with me and you have every right to be, but I needed to see if I could help." Juniper looked between Tyson and her son, seeing Bramble more alert and engaged than he had been since the incident. "How did you—" "He hasn't spoken to anyone since it happened." "Sometimes," Tyson said quietly, "the person who was part of the scary thing can also be part of the healing. If Bramble associates me with the trauma, maybe spending time with me in a safe place can help him understand that I'm not actually dangerous." Dr. Mitchell appeared behind Juniper, prepared to remove Tyson immediately, but stopped when she saw Bramble sitting up in bed, clearly more present than he had been in days. "This is highly irregular," she said, but her tone was curious rather than angry. "I know," Tyson replied, "but look at him. He's talking. Maybe what he needed wasn't to forget what happened, but to understand that I'm not actually a threat." Over the next hour, with Dr. Mitchell's supervision, Tyson talked with Bramble about courage and fear. He shared stories about his own childhood fears and the importance of helping others even when you're scared. When Crispin arrived for his morning visit, he found his son chatting animatedly with Tyson. "Daddy!" Bramble called out, running to his father for the first time since the incident. "I'm not scared anymore. Tyson taught me that being scared is okay, but you can still be brave." Crispin looked at Tyson with confusion and gratitude. 3 days ago, he couldn't even look at men without panic attacks. "Sometimes," Dr. Mitchell explained, "the best way to process trauma is to recontextualize it in a safe environment." Mr. Fury's presence allowed Bramble to see him as a person rather than a threat. As word spread that Bramble was speaking and interacting with male staff, the story shifted. Social media buzzed with new headlines. "Hero returns to complete the rescue. Tyson Fury's secret hospital visit heals traumatized child." But for Tyson, what mattered was when Bramble hugged him goodbye and whispered, "Thank you for being brave enough to be scared." As he left the hospital, Tyson faced a very different crowd of reporters. The questions were no longer accusations, but curiosity about his methods and future plans. Tyson paused at the entrance, looking back toward the pediatric ward. "Sometimes," he told the reporters, "saving someone isn't about being strong enough to fight off danger. Sometimes it's about being gentle enough to help them understand they were strong enough all along."